Fáilte go dtí Lá nIarchimí, poblachtacha. Welcome to the Political Ex-Prisoners Day, which normally we would host in the Féile Club on the Andersonstown Road. Due to COVID restrictions, then we're just going out here along with the Féile on the online, as an online event. We have several contributions coming up here during the day. Myself, I'm Michael Culbert. I'm the director of Coiste and nIarchimí. We have 7 offices throughout basically throughout the north of Ireland, with people working quite intensely on behalf of the political ex-prisoner community. We'd like to highlight on the Political Ex-Prisoners Day the issues that we're working on and how we can work to assist the political ex-prisoners, plus of course other things which are going on within the political ex-prisoners world. We have several speakers coming up here and during the period of time of the show here, we'll be talking to Sean McCabe and Terry Doherty. These are 2 men intricately involved in the cycling club relating to Kieran Doherty. Every year they have a cycle run down to the area where Kieran was elected, fundraiser, etc., etc. They'll be talking about their experiences within the cycling and not only their annual event, but other events which they do involving the political ex-prisoners and the cycling. We also have Gerry Kelly, currently Sinn Féin MLA and serial escapee from British prisons. Last December, he brought out his book, and he will be doing a bit of a conversation about his imprisonment, his escapes, his life story, some of which are quite horrendous, the treatment which he received when he was in prison over in England in the 1970s. And also what we have here today too is a contribution from Padraig Ó Muirigh, a solicitor, who has been intricately involved with us as an organisation over the years, raising cases on behalf of the political ex-prisoner community. He will outline the issues which he's involved in at the moment, the most recent of which was the issue about the whole package of internment. Gerry Adams won a case on a technicality. A lot of people think it's across the board. It's not quite, but Padraig will explain the delicacies of that situation. And we do encourage anybody who thinks they have a case to raise to contact Padraig Ó Muirigh. That'll come through in the conversation, which Padraig will be following up here shortly. You'll also get a rundown on the issues which we have been raising for the past few years on the broad issue of the H blocks and how the political prisoners were treated by the British government within the H blocks, which led up to the hunger strike in 1981. We all know Gerry Adams won his case there with the British government. There may be legal issues which could be raised, which could give some degree of common sense to people. But in broader terms, this is a political issue, and that's on those grounds that the Coiste is raising it to expose the British government for how it has dealt with us Irish people who've opposed their presence in our country. Basically, that's as much as we're going to be bringing through here in this short novel way of communicating with you all. I hope some of you get something new out of it. I hope it's of some use to you, and I would definitely hope that this time next year we will be able to have our usual Lá nIarchimí poblachtacha in the Féile Club in Belfast.
Good afternoon. This is Padraig William from Coiste and nIarchimí here, interviewing Gerry Kelly for the virtual Féile and Phobail event, Prisoners Day. Normally, Prisoners Day held in the Féile on the Friday of Féile. However, this year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we're doing our event as a virtual event. Gerry, good afternoon.
How are you doing, Pete?
We're here to talk about your literature, your poetry, and your books. The theme of this year's Coiste and nIarchimí Day is to be the literature and writings from the prison, however that has extended. But your book, Playing My Part, was released in December last year. Can you tell us a wee bit about the motivation behind you writing the book?
Well, I wish I could say that I was a great student in school and, I'm into literature, but I wasn't. But obviously you read voraciously in jail. And I did a lot of reading, very eclectic reading. I've always had a liking for poetry, probably apart through my laziness. So you can take a poetry book down, you can read it for 5 minutes, you can read it for 5 hours. And I've never started reading poetry without getting something out of it, no matter, what poetry you were reading. So I had that was sort of in me, and even in school, I liked a bit of poetry. So when I was inside, I wrote poetry. I didn't realize at the time, but I think it was through therapy. Just when I had something in my mind or I wanted to get rid of something, I put it out there. I used to try and read poetry. Poetry may be an exaggeration, by the way, but certainly I tried my best in terms of that. And when I was, just before I got out of jail, I had sent poetry out. I forget what it was, 50 or 60 poems over a period. And Desi Wilson, Father Desi Wilson, the community priest, seen them and wanted to publish them. They eventually got published in a thing called, a small volume called Words from the Cell. When I then was arrested and then brought back till extradited from Holland back to the Hates Blocks, or actually even before that, when I was in the Hates Blocks before, I bumped into Lorna McKeown, who's an ex-hunger striker and long-term prisoner, and Brian Campbell. And sort of through conversations about literature at that stage, because I'd read a lot, we started talking about, do you write poetry? It was a wee bit like, didn't want to show it, but then once I knew you wrote a bit of poetry. And then that expanded into moving around the blocks and starting a lot of poetry classes under a thing called Practicing Poets. You do develop, because you have the time to develop an interest in sort of a wide range of reading. What I got interested in, I suppose, was Republicans writing about what we were doing, because there was a huge amount of propaganda out there. I enjoyed Ernie O'Malley's books, On Another Man's Wound and The Singing Flame, Tom Barry's book, it was called Guerrilla Days in Ireland, and Don Tracy and people like that. So these were people who were involved in the IRA going back a long time ago and involved in activism. And it stuck with me that the best people to write about what we were going through was us, because you get academics writing it, you get people coming in, you get journalists, you get all of that, who have a great claim, which I'm quite dubious about being objective. And I wasn't necessarily looking for objectivity, I was looking for our story to be told from a Republican point of view. So that started me off. And then when I got out, both Brian and Lawrence, I was saying to them, go off and write stuff and all of that there. And they were saying, well, what about you? And I said, well, I've just some other stuff to do, so I won't do that. And then came back on me. I suppose I wanted to write, the easiest place to start, I didn't know if I could write a book, to be honest with you. I knew nothing about it, except reading. And but I thought that the escape, because it was part of it, and I could have access to people who were involved in it that other people couldn't have access. And I wanted to do it as a book of record. And I started writing the escape book. It was called simply The Escape. It was about the 1983 mass escape. And once I did that, to tell you the truth, you nearly get a bit cocky,
You felt there was another book?
No, I said, flip, I've wrote a book, maybe I could write another one. And that's where playing my part came in. And that was really about my life. And my reasoning in doing it, where I started off was, of course, it was about me, because that's the easiest way to deal with it. But that I thought that I was typical of my generation, living in Belfast from working class area, coming from a family of 11 children, all the events of the pogroms in '69 and Catholics getting run out, then the British coming in and all of that. And I was around 16, I think, at the time, and then joining the IRA. I thought, why not try and do that? But to try and represent, not just myself, but represent what was typical of our generation, because there's many, many people, and people maybe don't understand this, many, many people of my generation who joined the Republican struggle. And I just set about from that point of view. So while the book is a personal narrative, it is there to represent the narrative of many, many people as far as I'm concerned. And I hope that I managed to do that. And it went through a series of things, I suppose, of my life, early life, which was common to other people, working class, big families and all of that. I wasn't from a particularly Republican family, but I was radicalized, and I wanted to explain that because, at 16, you don't know what the world's about, but you know what's going on around you. So it wasn't ideology, or it wasn't even the books that I'd read. It was what was happening on that it's the action around you which radicalized me, and I wanted to explain that.
And of course, you do go on to talk in the book of your imprisonment, particularly in England, and I suppose for people like me growing up and being, politicised, if you want, by the experience of others. The hunger strike and the forced feeding that you embarked on was an epic individual struggle.
Well, I mean, I was looking back now, it seems a bit strange, but I was 19 at the time. Got sentenced to 2 lives, 20 years. We, in London, we had agreed, I was with the Price sisters and a number of others, Hugh Finney and a number of other comrades. And we had decided, because we knew we were going to be separated after it, that we were going to go on hunger strike to go back to Ireland. There had already been a fairly epic hunger strike in 1972 on the Crumlin Road, which had achieved political status. So we were going on hunger strike to be transferred, so we would also have political status. And they started force feeding on the 19th day. And I was quite aware at that stage of Tom Sash, who had died of force feeding in 1917. And, there was a particular governor coming in and sort of going through the details of it and how horrible it was and all of that. But you've great strength and stamina if you believe in what you're doing when you're young. Don't say you don't have it when you're older, but there's a certain thing with youth, which is hard to break. So I went on hunger strike with my comrades on the 19th day. They came down to my cell. I was in Warmwood Scrubs at the time, and I was naked because I was on hunger strike. And I remember I had a pair of rosary beads. I was quite Catholic at the time. I'm not now, but I was then. And the doctors, these were jail doctors, came in with a number of warders, and actually some nurses, civilian nurses who were, I think, agency nurses. They came into the hospital, the Warmwood Scrubs hospital, prison hospital, and said, "If you don't take food, we're going to force feed you." And I said, "Thanks for telling me, but I'm not taking food." And when they came back, so they gave me half an hour. When they came back, I had moved the bed, I'd barricaded the doors. The doors used to open inwards. I barricaded against the door so they couldn't open the doors. So they were quite angry about that. And then I was sitting sort of cross-legged in the bed. So anyway, they came down with acro props, bounced the door in. One of the cupboards that I'd used, the barricade started splintering all around me. And they came in 6, 8-handed. No more, 8 or 10-handed, I think it was. And they subdued me fairly very quickly, trailed me up the bed. And it's like, I suppose, any ordinary hospital bed. It had a high end and a low end. And they dragged me up until, a jackknife position, a sitting position. Then they started pulling my hair back pulling my neck back. I realised later what they were doing was, according to them, trying to get a straight line down into my stomach. But it was very painful and frightening, if I'm being honest. And at that stage, there was a number lying on my legs. My arms were being held back. There was a couple of people holding my head. So I couldn't move anything, except my eyes at that stage. And I didn't want to open my mouth because I knew they were trying to put the tube into it. And the battle started. I found out your jaw was probably one of the strongest muscles in your body. But they did a number of things, and you have to sort of amalgamate them in. They changed tactics it was very, very crude at the start. And what it amounted to was, they tried to pull my lips up and down, push my nose, bled my nose, were pulling back, digging their knuckles into my jaw joints and all of that. And then they eventually used large forceps. They're like scissors, metal, and rubbed up down my gums till a gas. And when a gas, they put a bit, I can only describe it as a bit. It's like a piece of wood with a hole in the middle. and they pulled that back. And once it got into my mouth, that was your mouth was open, and there was a hole in there, so they put the tube down. And I always remember the number of times I got force fed. That was the point where it was most frightening, because I knew that if it went down the wrong way, the food was getting into my lungs, and that was it. That's what happened.
Because Thomas Ashe died
through that, as well as lungs filled up. What they said was pneumonia, but it was actually your lungs filling up. And you can't say anything, because you've already made your decision. The only thing you can show is the panic in your eyes. And as far as they're concerned, you've made your decision and doing that. And that became, and then they got more, I don't want to use the word sophisticated, although maybe it is. They realized that when they put a Ral's tube, which is a very thin tube, down the nose, and it makes you gag. So it would gag, and then they get the bit in, and then they realized if they pull it back and forward, there's a soft membrane at the back of your nose, your nasal passage. And I can only describe it as like a needle being pushed in at the side of your eye. It was very, and that would sort of make it. Sometimes I managed, because your determination was up and down, and sometimes I managed to stop them. But any time that happened, then they would bring in another doctor who was just vicious, and he would be quite brutal about, very brutal. Some of the others, I sensed in some of the others that they weren't happy with it. They weren't. It was tugging at them. Was it the right thing to do, and all of that? And I started then, which I hadn't before. And sometimes you were completely exhausted. Well, most times you're completely exhausted, but sometimes you're quite emotional, And of course, you don't think. Looking back at my age, you can see it, but at the time, it sort of, you're nearly hurting yourself. You're going, I need to stay strong and all that, But some was very emotional. And then I started talking to the doctors. One in particular, a youngish guy, he was about 30 at the time, I think. And he was actually a psychiatrist, but they brought him in to do this. And I said to him, why are you doing this? And he says, I'm being pragmatic. And I says, you mean you're being patriotic? And he laughed. He sort of laughed, and I says, I don't know what you're laughing at. I says, I don't want you to do this. So you're doing it for some other purpose. I says, so you're doing it for your government. So if I say it's patriotic, you're being patriotic to the British or English government. And he walked out of that, but he never came back. And I realized that you could start breaking them down. So eventually, to cut a long story short, there was about 10 doctors in it. 2 wouldn't do it from the start because they had Irish connections. And I didn't know this at the time, I found this out later. But the rest of them broke down to 3 senior medical people who just, one of them was the vicious guy, who just continued it on until we took a court case, actually. But I was fed 167 times in a period of 205 days. So part of the other system that they used was that because your stomach rejects it. So straight away, your stomach's like the size of a pea or an egg, or it's very small. And what was happening then was I was rejected, so I was thrown up. And one of the doctors, or probably one of what's called the medical warders, had the idea of collecting it when I vomited it up and putting it back in, which nearly annoyed me more than the rest of it, So I went on for that length of time, and the other comrades went through the same, the 2 Price sisters and Hugh Féile. We were the last ones on the hunger strike. Michael Gaughan and Frank Stagg and Paul Holmes came on the hunger strike. A couple of months, 2 or 3 months towards the end, although nobody knew when the end would come. At one stage, I went in a hunger and thirst strike because I wanted to bring it to a head. And I was on that for about 10 days. But what they did then was they would give you more fluids. So you were being force-fed maybe twice instead of once in a day. And then at other times, they realized that your body wanted the food, so they would not come in. They wanted to make you hungry again. So maybe they wouldn't force-feed you the next day or for 2 days, and then they'd come in. And it was that type of thing that went on. They stopped about 2 weeks before. No, they stopped about 2 weeks. It might have been a week. I'm a bit not sure about that. But Michael Gaughan, who had gone on hunger strike in Parkhurst on the Isle of Wight, There was talks in the background, an MP Jack Stollard, Lord Longford, Lord Brockway, and we're talking to Dolars and Dolars Price. She was in her and Merriman Brixton, and sort of a deal was forming to transfer us back if we came off the hunger strike. And then Michael, in the middle of that, Michael Gaughan, frankly, was killed, same as Tom Walsh. They said, I think they had an open verdict, they said it was pneumonia, but it was to deal with force feeding, and it was 64 days, if I remember correctly, on hunger strike. And he was a young man. He was older than me at the time, but looking back now, he was very young. I think he was 27, I think, maybe a couple of years out there. And I think his death actually won the hunger strike, because within a short period after, he died on the 3rd of June, 1974, and they came with a deal that we would be sent back by Christmas. They then reneged on that deal, so I had to try and escape at that stage out of Warmwood Scrubs. And then when the ceasefire came in 74, 75, I beg your pardon, it was in 74 and 75, the negotiators used us as a sign of faith. So the two Price sisters got home in March, and then we got home in April. So that becomes, I suppose, an emotional part of the book. I know other people who were involved in writing, and I see more people doing it now, and I always encouraged it while I was inside. And the first step into it, I think, for many, was through poetry.
Well, one of your famous poem, for want of a better word, would be your poem about Bobby Sands' mother that you wrote. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, it's nice of you to say it's famous, but what happened was, I was in the cages, so I had political status. The compounds or cages of Long Cash. The hunger strike was in the H blocks just across, a couple of 100 yards away. So I remember very well in the hut, we were in Nissen huts, like a prisoner of war camp type thing. They were in cells. The news came on, and we went up the news, and I remember Bobby Sands' mother coming out and saying, quite emotionally and very difficult for her, my son is dying. And he died then the next morning at 17 minutes past 1. Again, I might get some of this stuff wrong, but that's my memory of it. And we all went down. I remember there wasn't a, you could hear a pin drop. There was no noise. We all went down, and I started writing. And I wrote about 20 verses of poetry about Bobby Sands and comradeship and the struggle and, hunger strike and emotion and family and all that there. And I put it away, and I couldn't, when I came back to it on a number of occasions, I couldn't really realize what I was talking about, right? So eventually, it might have been 6 months later, I realized that actually, Bobby was another writer. Bobby wrote prolifically. And we see his writings now. And, he had said it all for himself. And what I realized was it was his mother, nearly his mother's story, which had affected me. So I ended up with a 4-line poem called Rosaline Sands, which is his mother's name. And it was about her and what effect it had on her, And it's quite an emotional poem, but I think it said instead of 20 verses, it said what I started off to say. So I suppose that's why I remember it. Although if you asked me to quote it now, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
You alluded to Lawrence and Brian Campbell and the whole project, and quite a lot of us will remember from that time that there was a really important push, if you want, within the prison for people to educate, the right to read and all the rest of it. How would you see that as having bearings on the wider way in which Republicans need to tell their story?
Well, I in a way, I'm saying this as a Republican, but I think it's essential. There's a huge debate now about narratives. And Republicans, and particularly myself, have been involved in that whole debate. It's a very simple thing. Like with loyalists or with unionists or even with some nationalists and with whoever, everybody has their own narrative. And my view is that's okay. But what I want to do is get our narrative out. I don't dismiss your narrative. The difficulty in it all is that there is a huge establishment approach to try and diminish our narrative, that there's only one narrative, that we were wrong and the state was right. And I think that's the essence of it, that we need to get our narrative out. There's nobody helping us doing it. There's nobody's going to do it for us. It has to be us who do that. And even in the stuff around legacy, where we had the structures put together to have an oral archive as well as the truth, basically the information retrieval, and which is basically a truth commission and all of that. That's been binned. One of the reasons that's been binned by the British is because they simply do not want the truth out. And I'm not saying that Republicans have all the truth. Of course they haven't. But they have a truth and they have a narrative. And more of our
the quality of that narrative that you're alluding to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were wrong. We were right and the British were wrong. The British think they were right and we were wrong. But that's not the issue in a way about writing. It is being able to say what you believed and give facts of what happened, because you have to have facts in the middle of it. And then they can take it or leave it, But if we don't do it, it won't be done. And for prisoners, I mean, I might be making a wrong claim here, but one of the things just before I got out of jail in '89 was, would I do the prisoners' day in the felons? And if you might remember, I think you might have been still in jail. Actually. What we did probably for the first time, because jail had been quite a macho, because all men, I suppose, quite a macho environment. We did poetry reading in it, so there was a number of people that got up and read poetry and all of that there, and that became. I suppose we nearly made acceptable, showing your emotions. And I remember somebody saying to me, because some of them were very frank poems, saying to me, you're letting the screws know what's in your head. And I says, actually, you're not doing that, because they use that anyway. They read your letters all the time. But once you put it out there in the open, once you put it out in the public, it's no longer a weapon to them, because you've said it yourself. So what are they going to do? Saying, you this, you that. And I said, yeah, of course it did. That's why I wrote it.
And obviously that's a very strong platform and rationale for people involving themselves in writing.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just ex-prisoners, of course, but I mean, that started in prison, and like many conflicts and many building for the future, even peace processes, political processes, all of that, a lot of it took place in jail, and leaderships were formed in jail. And I'm not saying that to the exclusion of leaderships who were outside, because I never exaggerated, but you can see it in other conflicts like South Africa and all of that. And Nelson Mandela being a perfect example, that they were able to argue these things out. You have time to think, you have time to discuss, you have time to strategize and all of that there. And I think that is brought outside with the release of prisoners, and had an impact and a substantial impact on the struggle.
Gerry, on that note, well, thank you very much, and we're looking forward to Prisoners' Day as a virtual event this year. And we hope the book is selling well.
Well, I'm glad both of us are virtually free. Thank you.
Thank you. So as part of Prisoners' Day during Féile and Phobail, we have Terry Doherty and Sean McCabe from the Kieran Doherty Cycling Club here to talk about the club and when it was founded and what kind of work they would do. So my first question is, when was the club founded? Who founded it? And why are you in existence?
Well, initially we started off as part of the 25th anniversary for the hunger strikes, and the Colin Commemoration Committee decided to do a cycle. We're going to fundraise. We're putting in a rock, block paving, Celtic cross and murals and stuff in Twinbrook. And I had approached Philip Mitchell from Bunscon Slade to do, and Common Sport and Phobail had run a cycle to Donegal and asked could we cycle along with them, but do our own fundraising. So he gave us permission. So at the same time, Sam Baker had been talking to Bill Groves, and Andy Town had been doing something similar. So we both come together, and Bill Groves had been speaking to Terry, and Terry says, well, why don't we go to Kieran's monument, Ballyconnell?
And obviously going to Ballyconnell was because Kieran had been elected TD for Calvin Monaghan in 1981.
Yes, that's correct. He was elected down there. So also the reason why we got on the bigs was that Kieran was also a cyclist in his day, rode the Ulster Championships, and we thought it was a fitting tribute to him to do this on bikes and do his monument. The Ballyconnell, where the boys down there fundraised to build the monument down there in the park in Ballyconnell.
And that's one of your raising debtors as well, that you actually use the cycle runs to raise funds for the Republican monuments in the Greater Andersonstown area.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, it's not the local monuments that we do this for. The ones on the gable walls and the street corners, where our comrades had passed away, even, and just to remember them.
And how successful would that part of the work be that you do?
Well, over the years, we were able to raise quite a few pound. Every year we try to get about £3,000 to £4,000, and that goes to the upkeep of all the monuments and trying to improve the maintenance of them, cutting the grass around them, just whatever needs done, painted, and that's.
Well, one of the most recent projects was the monument in Ballyconnell itself. A bit of disrepair, and all the slate tiles were fixed, and kids had been abusing it, with skateboards and stuff. So we put railings around it and then closed it. So we did.
And Sean, you usually sort of suss out the routes, so to speak, when you're doing your routes, your cycle routes. Can you give us an idea of what you do, where you go, and how far you go? In fact,
well, the first year we done it, myself, Sam Baker, and Bill Groves were set off, and we were conscious to take in Camlock, which is home of Raymond McCreash, the hunger striker, and Kieran had replaced Raymond McCreash on the hunger strike, and we had stayed in Crossmaglen overnight there, and to take in that route. Then from there, we would have skirted the border and taken Fermanagh, which was part of the constituency of Bobby Sands, and won the election on the 9th of April in 1981. So we were taking in them sort of things. So that was part of the route and part of the reason for them routes.
And you have also travelled to Cork.
We've done several different journeys over the years. One of the most recent one was the Cork, a 3-day cycle down to Cork to Terence McSweeney's grave, and that's one of the reasons for that was that Kieran's Republican hero was Terence McSweeney. So we've done that, on Kieran's just before Kieran's anniversary 2 years ago.
2 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So the logistics of it, you obviously must need and get a lot of support from the local communities, from local Republicans, wherever you travel.
Absolutely. And, places like Super Value Dairy Farm, anything we need, foodways, that they're there for us. Cooper's Chemist,
very good. Every single year, without fail. Local shops in or around the place, family and friends. The old JJ McGee from North Belfast, he's a councillor. He gives us his van every year.
Yeah.
Fills it up with diesel, and away you go, lads. And without people like that, it would be very hard on us.
Like 2 years ago, when we were doing the Cork run, we had a commemorative shirt made for it, and the PD, the Roddies, and the Felons, they paid for the shirts. Cost almost £900. So between the three of them, so a lot of support.
Yeah, and obviously it's good to get that support. How many people would be in the club? How many people on average would do the cycles?
We have like a core of maybe a dozen, and then sometimes depending because it's done over the summer, people, it's on holidays and stuff, so it's hard to get.
Yeah.
And then if we were doing it around May, like we had done, the last couple of projects were done in May, we've had a lot more. had a lot more cyclists rather than in the summer.
We also done a tour of the hunger strikers' graves over 2 days.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago, was it,
Last
as well?
year.
Or
That was
last year?
last year,
Yeah.
and that was fantastic. Meeting actually at every grave, the families of the hunger strikers came out, comrades of theirs, and give us wee anecdotes of what they were like in jail. You know, just give you that wee insight that things that you'd never heard before. These stories that you probably would have never heard only we'd done this.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I mean, I have to say, I realise the importance of that, because I know a lot of years ago, the ex-prisoners in Derry organised an excursion where they travelled around the north and visited all the graves. And I know from speaking to them afterwards that it was really, really important for them to meet families of the hunger strikers at the various venues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we also done Mayo. We went to the graves of Frank Stagg and Michael Culbert. We were met by Frank Stagg's brother, George.
Yeah.
There's over. We also visited the grave of Matt Devlin and Art Bow. He had replaced Martin Herson on the hunger strike. So we'll have a plan this year to visit Sean McKenna's grave and possibly go to the Cooley Mountains.
But of course, I mean, you just don't wake up one morning and say we're getting on the bikes. You obviously have a big commitment to it and training.
Yeah. That's it. We always try to work towards a project, you know.
Over the winter, we'll stay out in the bikes right over the winter. You know, so the miles are up, because some of these things, runs we do would be in May. So you need them miles in your legs.
Many miles, would you say, for example, a cyclist would need to do a week in preparation for a run?
100 mile.
At least 100 mile a week?
Yeah.
And who would be your chief trainer?
Well, there's nobody really, you know, it depends who comes out. I would take a run. If I'm not out, Sean would take a run. Brian Holmes would take a run. Brian Holmes, at the minute, he's an Olympian. He went to the Olympics back
72.
in 72 and protested about the NCA and the Federation. He came back home, and he also done a lot of time in jail too. Came out from jail, and then he started back on the bike and rode the Ross, which is a Tour of Ireland.
Yeah.
And he was very young when he done that, and for him, he held his own.
Yeah. Sean Kelly made that famous, didn't he? Him and Stephen Roach mostly.
Yeah. Stephen Roach won in 79.
So this year, what's the plan?
Well, this year, on the 26th of June there, we were to cycle from here to Cork again, but it was taken in the 4 graves of Joe McKelvey, Dick Barrett, Rory O'Connor and Liam Mellows. It was going from Milltown Cemetery to Glasnevin, and then on to Wexford where Liam Mellows is buried, and then on to Cork. But unfortunately with the pandemic, we've had to put that on hold.
Do you hope to get it completed this year, or is it just
It probably won't be this year. So the next one is the actual Kieran Doherty cycle, and it's on the 1st and 2nd of August this year.
And what are you going to be doing then on the 1st and 2nd of August?
Well, on the day, we normally do this over 2 days. We would go to Crossmaglen the 1st and 2nd on to Ballyconnell, which gives you roughly 100 mile. But the way we're doing it this year, we're doing on one hit,
right?
And that'd be 86 mile. The way, because we're not taking any detours, so it's a wee bit shorter. But then again,
it's just with hotels and stuff, and the way the pandemic is
left.
So we just poured it down Armagh, Emmyvale, Monaghan, Clonus, and then the
Ballyconnell. And some of the lads from Ballyconnell are part of it as well, aren't they?
Yes, there's a committee down there. The Kieran Doherty committee was running for years, and the boys down there, as I said, they joined in, were absolutely fantastic, because as we get down there, they've tea, sandwiches, whatever we need, it's all laid on first when we get down there. Of course, there's a good end of it. We all finish up in the pub and we'll have a few drinks after. It's a bit of socialising.
That's right.
Which
Yeah,
brings us all together and a bit of crack.
Okay. Well, look, thanks very much. It's really appreciated, because I mean, I know from the point of view of Coiste that we have never really sort of highlighted or explored the work that you do, particularly around the monuments. So thanks very much for doing the interview.
Yes, you're welcome.
Got to meet my August.
My who?
We're here with Padraig Murray, solicitor. Padraig takes part in the Coiste and nIarchimí Prisoners' Day every year, where he will outline the legal cases that he has taken in representing Republican prisoners, whether it's to do with the internment case or the situation in the H blocks during the blanket. However, today, in the light of the ruling in the Gerry Adams case over internment, Padraig is going to outline the work that he's been doing over the years and give us a sense of where that those cases lie and how things have developed.
Okay.
Go ahead, Padraig.
Well, my involvement in the internment cases goes back maybe over 10 years now. The legality of internment was brought into fresh focus by the discovery of documentation in the National Archives in Kew Gardens around 10 years ago, which shed light on the legality of internment, particularly the discriminatory nature of it against the nationalist community, where there was a different arrest policy for Catholics and Protestants, and also the indiscriminate nature of it, in that the orders on the morning of internment stated that all of those over 18 in the household should be arrested, and those are nationals. So that documentation led us to commence proceedings on the 40th anniversary of internment, and that involved a number of internees. Recently, we've had the Supreme Court judgment in the Gerry Adams case, which has opened up another line of legal cases, and that case explored a later period of internment, post-November 1972, when interim custody orders were introduced. And part of the requirement of that legislation was that the British Secretary of State had to personally consider each of the files of the internees before issuing the order. And clearly in the Adams case that wasn't the case. And we have found through looking through various prisoners' papers that there is little or no evidence of consideration by the British Secretary of State. So we've initiated proceedings and a number of cases related to that period of internment as well in recent weeks.
So what would your first cases have involved? How many people?
Well, we're at the minute, initially we had around 100 internees when we started this process, as I say, around 2011 when we started the proceedings. I think it was August 2011. Now we have almost 500 internees, and literally in the last number of weeks since the Supreme Court judgment, we've had a further 100, 150 internees come to the office. So there's quite a considerable number of internees involved in this process at the minute.
You pointed out that there was a difference in people from the nationalist community and how they were treated vis-a-vis internment in comparison to how loyalists were being treated, given that at that time loyalist death squads were very, very active.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lawyer who's also dealing with a number of outstanding legacy inquests and legacy investigations, and it's very clear that loyalists were involved in hundreds of shootings, murders, robberies at that particular time, and they weren't considered a threat to the state, obviously, and weren't considered in terms of any process around internment. And in fact, there were no loyalists arrested during that process for a number of years until the end of internment, and that was, again, only a token gesture. We've seen that from the National Archive material as well. It was done just to save a wee bit of face. So that was clear evidence. And we also had the different arrest policies for different communities. It was very, very clear evidence that this was discriminatory. It was intended for the nationalist community. And I think also, we've seen evidence that those involved in the civil rights campaign, those involved in socialist politics as well, not only the Republican family, but it certainly excluded the loyalist unionist community.
The cases of which become known as the hooded men have been very well documented. Would your cases also involve the treatment of people who would have been arrested, taken to various centres for interrogation? Would there be widespread evidence of ill treatment of those prisoners, and would that be part of your remit?
Absolutely. We have obviously spoken and taken instructions from hundreds of internees, and it's very clear that type of treatment was widespread. Some of those techniques were used on other prisoners as well. some of those people were subject, not only at the time of arrest from their homes where they were badly beaten in many cases, but also during their period of detention as well. So that will form part of the evidence we bring forward during these different proceedings.
It's occurred to me as well that one of the big incidents, if you want, that it's come to light in recent times has been the killing of Hugh Coney, who was trying to escape. Would there be wide-ranging legal implications over the fact that he was shot dead by the British Army, albeit while trying to escape?
Yes, I mean, I'm involved. I represent the Coney family, and we made an application to the Attorney General a number of years ago to get a fresh inquest. That application was successful, so Hugh Coney's case is one of those 50 or so outstanding legacy inquests, so there will be a full inquest, full investigation, legal investigation of that incident. And in fact, we have spoken to a number of those who were on the escape, and they have provided very helpful evidence as to what transpired. It is very, very clear in that case that there was a cover-up. One example was that the bullets, the cartridges found at the scene didn't match the rifle which the soldier alleged he had fired from. And it's very clear that one of two things happened. Was that the rifles were changed between soldiers to maybe to assist with some kind of legal defence, or the cartridges belonged to another weapon and were placed there later on. There are also criticisms that the body was moved from the scene before any proper forensic examination as well. So there's quite a considerable evidence in relation to the death of Hugh Coney, which will be explored at a future inquest. What's also important, perhaps in light of the Adams judgment, is that those people who were on that escape, if, for example, if their internment was deemed unlawful, any convictions that may have arisen from that escape may have to go back to the Court of Appeal and may subsequently be quashed as well. So it may have probably further ramifications for those people who were involved in escapes. And that wasn't just the Coney case, there's some other examples through a different period of internment as well. So anyone who was unlawfully interned and who were convicted of offences during that internment, those convictions may well be quashed.
And again, the whole issue around CR gas, and I think you're involved in cases involving those affected by the CR gas as well.
Yeah, quite a few of those internees were involved in that period as well. So that's something that we had looked at and exploring. It's been difficult medically to identify causation and the link, but that's something certainly that we're exploring. That the use of CS gas obviously had then a future impact on the health of many of these prisoners and detainees.
Could you just bring it back a wee bit? The evidence that you would start to uncover, if you want, in respect of people being interned, and again, if my memory serves me correct, Evelyn Gilroy's case would have been one of the first cases that was being used as a test case, and it transpired that on the day that she was supposed to be in a certain place, which was justification for her internment, she actually wasn't in that place, and obviously highlights the corrupt nature, if you want, of the legal process in respect of internment. Would there be much of that type of evidence out there as well?
Yes, and this is the reason why the prisoners' papers, internment papers, are very important. We have found within those papers, we've been able to probe the reason behind the internment, or so-called reason behind the internment, and also probe the procedural, irregularities, if you like, of that process, in terms of whether there was consideration of the inter-custody order or some other part of the procedure. You've identified the Evelyn Gilroy case. For example, we have a reference from her boss at the time, who happened to be Barney Eastwood, who became very well known in later years as a boxing promoter, who stated that on the particular day that she was alleged to have done something that she was working. We have other examples where within the prison papers, it's very clear, and it's written in the papers that the internee was alleged to be involved in an incident, and he couldn't have possibly been involved because he was already in prison and detained at the time. So obtaining those papers is very, very important for those reasons. It helps us identify some irregularity. It helps us identify flaws in the decision-making process. The difficulty we've had is obtaining those papers. And where we have got them, very often they're heavily redacted, and we have been subject to national security certificates by the British Secretary of State. And basically that means is that they put a lot of black lines through significant parts of the papers. And we are currently challenging that or appealing that to the National Security Tribunal in London. And some of those other attorneys have also had their papers withheld. We don't have them yet. And that delay we have challenged by way of judicial review against the Department of Communities, which has had the test case, and that was actually the Hugh Coney case. So we've had a resolution to that. So we hope to have some of the prisoners' files now starting to find their way from the Public Records Office. And given that we now have a minister, we have Derby Harvey and now Carney Cullen. We've had the Assembly down for a few years, but before that we had a DUP minister who weren't very helpful around this issue. We're more optimistic that this process will start moving and prisoners will have their papers and we can make copies for them. And that will assist us in terms of identifying any illegality, any procedural flawed processes within their case.
And do you think the Gerry Adams case will speed things along now?
Absolutely. I mean, the Supreme Court judgment is highly significant. It opens up possibilities for a number of attorneys, particularly that period from the 7th of November 72 onward. However, I do want to emphasise that we're also going through the papers of those interned before then and still applying where we don't have them for those papers for attorneys. And we've no doubt there's some irregularities in there as well. The Adams case, has shone a light on a particular phase of internment and identified, there was reference in that case to 200 cases that were problematic. And clearly there has been some audit done back in the early 70s around the legality of those cases, and somebody somewhere's come up with this number. So we are obviously trying to get access to that document, which was referenced at a meeting in Downing Street back in the day. And I have no doubt that many of the attorneys we're representing are on that list, and those cases, will find their way, go through the course, and are probably in a good place.
The issue of compensation has obviously arisen as well in respect of Gerry Adams' case and speculation that he could get blah, blah, blah amount of money. Is compensation a possibility for the people that you're representing?
Yeah, essentially the remedy in a civil action is compensation. We are suing the British Secretary of State in these cases, so the court will have to give consideration to the issue of compensation and how you may do that, and quantum and so forth if the case is successful. So that would be the purpose of the civil action. Obviously, through that process, you're able to shine light on a particular period of our recent history and a particular brutal policy by the British government during that period. But in legal terms, the objective and one thing the court will have to consider is, if successful, how you then compensate the applicant.
To finish off, we did focus on internment, but I had mentioned your work with Coiste in respect of those who were in the blanket protest and the women in Armagh as well. Could you maybe give us a few pointers as to where things might be in that, just to give our listeners, our viewers, a sense of where that case would stand at the minute?
Yes, a couple of years ago we set up a panel, an international panel, which consisted of the former Solicitor General in Canada, Warren Almond, unfortunately since deceased, Richard Harvey, a human rights barrister, who's involved in Bloody Sunday and is involved in work at The Hague at the minute, from England, and a local retired GP, John Burton, who heard evidence from a number of blanket protesters from both Armagh, the Coiste, I think some from Crumlin Road as well. We took statements from, I think, over 80 or 90 blanket protesters. We heard evidence from a former governor and a former prison officer who became a governor in later years. We heard evidence also from loyalist blanket protesters. Phil Scraton gave evidence. Phil Scraton from Queen's University gave evidence. Kieran from Paper Trail, who had uncovered a number of files at Kew Gardens, which were very helpful. And all of that evidence was compiled, recorded, and now the panel is writing up a report, and we expect that to be completed within the next couple of months. They're writing it as we speak, and myself and Shane Walsh have been in contact with that panel. I should add that Phil Scraton at Queen's University is now involved in that panel since the death of Warren Allen, so he's going to assist in writing up the report. So we hope, and obviously COVID has impacted somewhat on this like everything else, but we hope to have that report released in around October of this year.
Brilliant. Grameen, my
Everybody,